The handcuffs bit into my wrists as the bailiff led me through the narrow hallway of the Denver County Courthouse. Each step echoed against the worn linoleum floors, a rhythm that matched the pounding in my chest. I could hear voices bleeding through the heavy oak doors ahead, lawyers shuffling papers, the low murmur of a judge dispensing justice like an assembly line worker stamping forms. It was a cold Thursday morning in late November. Outside, the Colorado sky hung gray and heavy, threatening snow that wouldn't fall for another few hours. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting everything in that sickly yellow glow that makes even innocent people look guilty. I wore my dress blues, not the current Marine Corps uniform. Mine was older, the kind issued in the late 2000s before they updated the design. The fabric had faded slightly over the years, stored in a duffel bag in my sister's garage after I got out. But I'd pressed it the night before in my cell, using the edge of my bunk and whatever heat I could generate from my own body weight. The creases weren't perfect, but they were there. The bailiff, a thick-necked man in his 50s with a wedding ring that looked too tight, glanced at my uniform with something between confusion and contempt. "You actually served?" he asked, not unkindly, but not warmly either. "Yes, sir," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. I hadn't spoken much in the 3 weeks I'd been locked up. He grunted, said nothing else, and pushed open the courtroom doors. The room was smaller than I expected. I'd seen courtrooms on TV, grand spaces with high ceilings and mahogany paneling, where justice felt like something sacred. This was different. The walls were beige, the benches were scuffed. A water stain spread across the ceiling tiles above the witness stand, like a slow-moving storm.
There were maybe a dozen people scattered throughout the gallery. A few looked like public defenders waiting for their cases to be called. Others seemed like family members. Tired eyes, slumped shoulders, the universal posture of people who'd spent too much time in places like this. I scanned the room quickly, hoping to see someone I knew. My sister had promised she'd be here, but her shift at the hospital started at 6 a.m., and I knew she couldn't afford to miss work, not with 2 kids and a mortgage. No familiar faces. The prosecutor sat at her table, a sharp-looking woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled into a tight bun. She wore a charcoal pantsuit and rimless glasses that caught the light when she turned her head. She didn't look at me as I was led to the defendant's table. She was busy reviewing a file, her pen moving in quick, efficient strokes. My public defender, a young man named Marcus Chen, who'd been assigned to me 2 weeks ago, stood as I approached. He looked exhausted. His tie was slightly crooked, and there was a coffee stain on his shirt cuff that he'd tried to hide by rolling up his sleeves. "Morning," he said quietly, gesturing for me to sit. "Morning," I replied. Marcus had done his best, I knew that. He'd met with me 3 times, each visit no longer than 20 minutes, because that's all the system allowed. He'd listened to my story, nodded in the right places, and told me he'd see what he could do, but I could see it in his eyes. The same look I'd seen in the eyes of VA counselors, employment officers, and apartment landlords over the past 5 years. He didn't believe me. Or maybe he did believe me, but it didn't matter. The system had already made its decision. "All rise," the bailiff announced. Everyone stood as Judge Howard Brennan entered from his chambers. He was in his mid-60s, with silver hair combed back from a lined forehead and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He wore the standard black robe, but it hung on him like he'd lost weight recently. Too much fabric around the shoulders, bunching at the sleeves. Judge Brennan moved slowly, deliberately, as if every action required conscious thought. He settled into his chair with a soft exhale, adjusted his glasses, and opened the file in front of him without looking up. "Case number 47 CR 2089, the bailiff announced. The People versus Marcus Daniel Hayes. Charges: aggravated assault, resisting arrest, and destruction of property. The judge's eyes skimmed the first page. His expression didn't change. Neutral, professional, perhaps faintly bored. This was just another case in a long line of cases. Another name, another story he'd heard 1,000 times before. He glanced up briefly, and his eyes landed on me. For a split second, something flickered across his face. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. He looked at my uniform, then back at the file, then at me again. Then he rolled his eyes. It was quick, almost imperceptible, but I saw it. A slight upward motion, a dismissive gesture that said everything I needed to know. Here we go again, another veteran playing the sympathy card. My jaw tightened. I'd expected this, but expecting it and experiencing it were two different things. The prosecutor stood. "Your Honor, the people are ready to proceed." Judge Brennan nodded. "Counsel for the defense." Marcus stood, straightening his tie. "Ready, Your Honor." "Very well." The judge leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Mr. Hayes, you are charged with aggravated assault on October 14th of this year, specifically targeting Mr. Gerald Voss outside the Rail Yard Tavern on Lawrence Street. You are also charged with resisting arrest when officers responded to the scene and destruction of property, namely Mr. Voss's vehicle, a 2019 Chevrolet Silverado, by kicking in the driver's side door and shattering the windshield." He paused, glancing at her notes. When officers arrived on scene, Mr. Hayes resisted arrest, resulting in minor injuries to Officer Daniels and Officer Coe. Mr. Hayes has a documented history of instability, Your Honor. He was dishonorably discharged from the Marine Corps in 2012 following an altercation with a superior officer. He has been unemployed for the past 18 months, living in transitional housing, and has missed multiple appointments with court-mandated counseling services. Each word landed like a hammer blow. Violent, unstable, disobedient, aggressive. I felt Marcus shift beside me, but he said nothing. What could he say? The facts were the facts, or at least the facts as the system had recorded them. "The people believe Mr. Hayes represents a continued threat to public safety," Ms. Garrett continued. "We are requesting that bail be denied and that the defendant remain in custody pending trial." She sat down. Judge Brennan looked at Marcus. "Counsel for the defense?" Marcus stood, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, my client disputes the prosecution's characterization of the events. Mr. Hayes acted in self-defense after being provoked by Mr. Voss, who has a documented history of harassment toward veterans, specifically targeting Mr. Hayes over a period of several months." The prosecutor made a small sound, not quite a scoff, but close. Marcus pressed on. "Furthermore, Your Honor, the alleged dishonorable discharge referenced by the prosecution is inaccurate. Mr. Hayes was—" "Counsel," Judge Brennan interrupted, his tone flat. "Do you have documentation to support that claim?" Marcus hesitated. "We are in the process of obtaining Mr. Hayes's service records, Your Honor. The VA has been—" "So, no. Not at this time, Your Honor." The judge made another note. "Anything else?" "Your Honor, Mr. Hayes has strong ties to the community. His sister resides in Aurora and has offered to provide housing and support." "His sister who isn't here today?" the judge asked, glancing at the empty gallery. Marcus faltered. "She's currently at work, Your Honor. She's a nurse, and—"
"Mr. Chen, I appreciate your efforts, but the facts are clear. Your client has a history of violence, no stable employment, no permanent residence, and failed to comply with court-ordered counseling. I see no compelling reason to grant bail at this time." The words hit me like a physical blow. Marcus tried again. "Your Honor, if I may—" "You may not." Judge Brennan's voice was firm now, edged with impatience. "The defendant will remain in custody. We'll reconvene in 2 weeks for a preliminary hearing. Bailiff, please. Your Honor. The voice came from the prosecutor's table. Miss Garrett had stood again, but her expression had changed. She was frowning, flipping through the file in front of her with quick, precise movements. Yes, Miss Garrett? The judge asked, clearly annoyed by the interruption. Your Honor, I apologize, but I believe there's been an oversight. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up to the light as if to confirm what she was reading. There's a supplemental report here that wasn't included in my initial review. It appears to be a military service verification form, dated 2 weeks ago. Judge Brennan's frown deepened. What does it say? Miss Garrett read silently for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line. Then she looked up, and for the first time since I'd entered the courtroom, she looked directly at me. Your Honor, according to this document, Mr. Hayes did not receive a dishonorable discharge. He was honorably discharged in 2012 following completion of active duty service. The courtroom went still. The judge held out his hand. Let me see that. Miss Garrett crossed the room and handed him the paper. Judge Brennan adjusted his glasses and read slowly. His eyes moved line by line. I barely breathed. After what felt like an eternity, the judge looked up. His gaze moved from the paper to me, and this time there was no eye roll, no dismissiveness, just silence. And in that silence, something shifted.
Judge Brennan set the paper down carefully, as if it might dissolve under rough handling. He removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times from officers who were about to deliver bad news, or from men who'd just realized they'd made a mistake they couldn't easily undo. Ms. Garrett, the judge said slowly, why wasn't this document included in your case file? The prosecutor's expression remained professional, but I could see the faint tension in her jaw. Your Honor, I can only assume it was misfiled or submitted after my office compiled the initial documentation. I reviewed everything provided to me by the arresting officers and the court clerk. This report was not among those materials. Judge Brennan's eyes narrowed. And yet it's dated 2 weeks ago? It should have been part of the record. Yes, Your Honor. A long pause. The judge put his glasses back on and read the document again, slower this time. I watched his face, trying to read every micro-expression, every flicker of doubt or recognition. Marcus leaned toward me and whispered, "Did you submit this?" I shook my head. I didn't even know it existed. Then who? "Quiet, please," the bailiff said, his voice low but firm. Judge Brennan looked up again, this time directly at me. "Mr. Hayes, according to this verification form, you served in the United States Marine Corps from 2006 to 2012. Is that correct?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said, standing. "And your discharge status was honorable?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Where did you serve?" I hesitated, not because I didn't want to answer, but because the memories came with weight. "Iraq, Your Honor. 2 deployments, 2008 and 2010. The judge made a note. "What was your MOS?" 0311, Your Honor. Rifleman. Another note. The judge's pen moved slowly across the page, deliberate and methodical. "It says here you received a Navy and Marine Corps Achievement Medal. What was that for?" My throat tightened. I hadn't thought about that medal in years. It was somewhere in my sister's garage, packed in the same duffel bag as my uniform. "We were on patrol outside Fallujah," I said. "IED hit the lead vehicle. 3 Marines injured. I pulled 2 of them out before the secondary explosion." The courtroom was silent. Judge Brennan wrote something down, then looked back at the document.
There's also a reference here to a classified operation in 2011. It says your involvement was verified by the Department of Defense, but details are redacted. He looked at me over his glasses. Can you speak to that? I felt every eye in the room on me. I can't discuss the specifics, Your Honor. It was a joint task force operation. The details are still classified. Understood. The judge paused, then leaned back in his chair. Mr. Hayes, help me understand something. You have an honorable discharge, you served your country with distinction, and yet, according to the prosecution, you've been living in transitional housing, unemployed and struggling with the legal system. What happened? It was the question I'd been asked a dozen times by social workers, VA counselors, and well-meaning strangers who saw the uniform and assumed I'd somehow failed to live up to it. I took a breath. When I got out, Your Honor, I tried to do everything right. I applied for jobs, I went to the VA for help with housing, I attended counseling sessions when they told me to. My voice was steady, but I could feel the anger simmering beneath the surface. But no one wants to hire a rifleman with PTSD. No one wants to rent to a veteran who can't provide 3 months' rent up front. And the VA? They tried. I won't say they didn't, but the system is broken. Judge Brennan didn't interrupt. I ended up in transitional housing because it was the only option. I missed counseling appointments because I couldn't afford the bus fare some weeks. And Gerald Voss? I stopped myself, forcing my jaw to unclench. He's been harassing me for months, calling me a fraud, telling people I'm lying about my service. The night of October 14th, he followed me out of the bar and started yelling. He shoved me first. I defended myself.
"And the vehicle?" the judge asked. "I kicked his truck because he tried to run me over," I said flatly. "He reversed toward me in the parking lot. I had to move or get hit. When I kicked the door, it was instinct, muscle memory from training. I didn't realize how much damage I'd done until after." Miss Garrett stood. "Your Honor, even if we accept Mr. Hayes's version of events, the fact remains that he caused significant property damage and resisted arrest." "Did he?" Judge Brennan asked, cutting her off. "Or did the responding officers assume he was resisting because they saw a man in distress and didn't bother to de-escalate?" The prosecutor's mouth tightened. "Your Honor, Miss Garrett, I've been on this bench for 22 years, the judge said, his voice taking on a harder edge. "I've seen enough cases to know when someone is being railroaded by a system that doesn't care enough to get the facts right." He tapped the verification form. "This document should have been part of the record from day one. It changes the entire context of this case. Mr. Hayes isn't some violent drifter. He's a decorated combat veteran who's been failed by the very country he served." The judge turned to Marcus. "Counsel, do you have any objections to a continuance while we conduct a full review of the evidence?" Marcus stood quickly. "No objections, Your Honor." "Good." Judge Brennan looked at me again, and this time there was something different in his eyes. Not pity, I would have hated that, but recognition, respect. "Mr. Hayes, I'm going to order your release on your own recognizance, pending further review. I'm also going to request that the VA assign you a caseworker immediately to assist with housing and employment. This court will not allow a Marine to sit in jail while bureaucrats shuffle papers." I felt my chest tighten. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. "Thank you, Your Honor." Judge Brennan held up a hand. "Don't thank me yet. You're still facing charges, and we still need to establish the facts. But I'll tell you this," he glanced at Miss Garrett, "if I find out that Mr. Voss provoked this incident and that law enforcement failed to investigate properly, there will be consequences." He banged his gavel. "Court is adjourned. Bailiff, process Mr. Hayes's release."
The next hour was a blur. Paperwork, signatures, a property return form where they gave me back my wallet, my phone, dead after 3 weeks, and the keys to a storage unit I could barely afford to keep. Marcus walked with me through the courthouse halls, still looking slightly stunned. "I don't know who submitted that report," he said, shaking his head, "but they just saved your case." "Any idea who it could have been?" I asked. "No clue. Maybe someone at the VA finally did their job. Maybe a fellow Marine saw your name in the system and pulled strings. Either way, you got lucky." Lucky. I didn't feel lucky. I felt like a man who'd been drowning and was finally allowed to take a breath, but the water was still rising. We stepped outside into the cold November air. Snow had started to fall, light flakes that melted on contact with the pavement. The sky was still gray, but somehow it looked less oppressive than it had that morning. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now you stay clean," Marcus said. "No contact with Voss, no missed court dates, and for God's sakes, get in touch with that VA caseworker as soon as they assign one." "I will." Marcus extended his hand. "Good luck, Mr. Hayes." I shook it. "Thank you." He nodded and headed back inside, leaving me alone on the courthouse steps. I stood there for a long moment, watching the snow fall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It must have had just enough charge left to power on. I pulled it out and saw a text from my sister, sent 2 hours ago. "I'm so sorry I couldn't be there. Please call me when you can. I love you." I typed back, "I'm out. I'll explain later." Then I slipped the phone back into my pocket and started walking.
I didn't know where I was going. The transitional housing facility was across town and I didn't have bus fare. But I didn't care. I needed to move, to feel the ground beneath my feet, to remind myself that I was still here. As I walked, I thought about the judge's question. Why is this Marine still behind bars? It was the right question, but it came 3 weeks too late. How many others were still locked up, still waiting for someone to ask that question? How many had given up hoping anyone would? I pulled my uniform jacket tighter against the cold and kept walking.
The VA caseworker's name was Linda Morales, and she called me 3 days after my release. Her voice over the phone was warm but direct. Someone would seen too much bureaucratic incompetence to waste time on pleasantries. "Mr. Hayes, I've been assigned to your case," she said. "I've reviewed your file, and frankly, I'm appalled at how you've been treated. We need to meet as soon as possible." We met at a Denny's on Colfax Avenue. It was the kind of place where the coffee was always lukewarm and the vinyl booths had seen better decades. But it was neutral ground and it was cheap. Linda was in her early 50s, with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that had witnessed 1,000 tragedies without losing their compassion. She carried a battered leather briefcase that looked older than I was. She slid into the booth across from me and immediately pulled out a thick manila folder. "I'm not going to sugarcoat this," she said, flipping it open. "Your records are a mess. Half the documents are misfiled, the other half are incomplete, and someone, I don't know who, marked your discharge status incorrectly in the system." "How does that even happen?" I asked. "Incompetence, overwork, apathy. Take your pick." She pulled out a form and turned it toward me. "This is the original discharge paperwork from 2012. See this box here? It clearly states honorable discharge, but when your file was digitized in 2015, someone entered it as other than honorable. That one error has been following you ever since." I stared at the form. 12 years of my life reduced to a clerical mistake.
"Who submitted the verification report to the court?" I asked. Linda's expression softened. "That was me." I looked up sharply. "You?" "I've been working with veterans for 15 years, Mr. Hayes. When I saw your name come through the system, I recognized it. I'd seen your file before, back in 2018 when you first applied for housing assistance. I remembered the discrepancy.
So when I heard you were in custody, I pulled your records and submitted the verification myself." "Why?" She looked at me like the question was absurd. "Because it was the right thing to do. Because you served your country, and you deserve better than this." I felt something crack open inside me, some wall I'd built to keep the anger and frustration contained. "Thank you," I said quietly. Linda nodded. "Don't thank me yet. We still have work to do." She pulled out more documents, employment applications I'd submitted over the years, medical records from the VA, incident reports from the night of my arrest. "I've also been looking into Gerald Voss," she said, her tone darkening. "He has a history. Did you know that?" "What kind of history?" "Harassment, assault. He's been arrested twice for starting fights outside bars, both times with veterans. The charges were dropped because the victims didn't want to press charges. They were afraid of retaliation." My hands clenched into fists on the table. "He targeted me because of my uniform," I said. "Yes, and he got away with it because the system didn't bother to investigate." Linda leaned forward. "But here's the thing, Mr. Hayes. I pulled the police report from the night you were arrested. The officers who responded, Daniels and Koo, they wrote that you were aggressive and uncooperative, but there's body cam footage." "There is?" "Yes, and I've requested a copy. If that footage shows what I think it shows, that you were defending yourself and that the officers escalated the situation, then we have grounds to challenge every charge against you." For the first time in months, I felt something like hope.
"What do I need to do?" I asked. "First, you need stable housing. I've contacted a veterans shelter in Lakewood. They have a bed available starting next week. It's not permanent, but it's a start." "Okay." "Second, you need to attend your court dates. No exceptions. Marcus Chen is a good lawyer, but he can't help you if you don't show up." "I'll be there." "Third, you need to take care of yourself. That means counseling, even if you hate it. That means eating regularly. That means not giving the prosecution any ammunition to use against you." I nodded. Linda closed the folder and looked at me with an intensity that made me sit up straighter. "Mr. Hayes, I've worked with a lot of veterans over the years. Some of them make it, some of them don't. The ones who make it are the ones who refuse to give up, even when the system tells them they're worthless. You're still here. That tells me you're a fighter." "I don't feel like one," I admitted. "That's because you've been fighting alone," she said, "but you're not alone anymore." The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, but it took 3 weeks for the body cam footage to be released. Marcus filed a motion to compel the police department to hand it over, and the prosecutor's office fought him every step of the way. When the footage finally arrived, Marcus called me immediately. "You need to see this," he said. We met at his office, a cramped room in a building that smelled like old carpet and burnt coffee. He had the footage queued up on his laptop. "Are you ready?" he asked. "Yeah." He hit play. The video was grainy, shot from the perspective of Officer Daniels' body cam. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m., October 14th.
The scene opened on the parking lot of the Rail Yard Tavern. I could see myself standing near the entrance, my back to the camera. Gerald Voss was in front of me, his face red and twisted with rage. "Fraud!" Voss was shouting. "You're a goddamn fraud! Stolen valor piece of—" "I'm not doing this with you, Gerald," I said, my voice calm but strained. "Just leave me alone." "Leave you alone? You've been lying to everyone. You never served. You bought that uniform at a thrift store." "I'm done talking to you." I turned to walk away. That's when Voss grabbed my shoulder and shoved me hard. I stumbled but didn't fall. "Don't walk away from me," Voss screamed. "Back off," I said, my voice harder now. Voss shoved me again, and then I shoved back. It wasn't a punch. It wasn't even aggressive. It was a defensive push, enough to create space between us. But Voss went down like he'd been shot. He hit the ground and immediately started yelling, "He assaulted me! He assaulted me!" That's when Voss got up and ran toward his truck. I followed, shouting at him to stop. He got in the driver's seat, started the engine, and then he reversed, straight toward me. I jumped to the side, and my boot connected with the driver's side door. The impact dented the metal and spiderwebbed the window. Voss slammed on the brakes, got out of the truck, and started screaming again, "You're insane! You're a psycho!" That's when the police arrived. Officer Daniels and Officer Coe got out of their patrol car with their hands on their weapons.
"On the ground, now," Daniel shouted. "He tried to hit me with his truck," I said, my hands raised. "On the ground." I complied immediately. I dropped to my knees, then to my stomach, hands behind my head. But when Daniels approached to cuff me, he yanked my arm hard enough to make me grunt in pain. "Stop resisting," he shouted, even though I wasn't. Coe joined in, pressing his knee into my back while Daniels wrenched my other arm behind me. "I'm not resisting," I said through gritted teeth. "Shut up," Daniels snapped. The video ended. I sat back in my chair, my hands shaking. "I lied," I said. "They wrote that I was aggressive and uncooperative, but I did everything they told me to do." "I know," Marcus said quietly, "and now we have proof." "What happens now?" "Now we take this to the judge and we bury the prosecution's case." The hearing was scheduled for the following Monday. This time, my sister was in the courtroom. She sat in the second row, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. When I walked in, she gave me a small, encouraging smile. Judge Brennan entered, and the bailiff called the court to order. Miss Garrett looked less confident than she had 3 weeks ago. She'd seen the footage. She knew what was coming. Marcus stood. "Your Honor, the defense moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Hayes on the grounds that the arrest was unlawful and the charges are unsupported by evidence." Judge Brennan leaned forward. "I've reviewed the body cam footage, Mr. Chen. It's compelling. Ms. Garrett, what is the people's response?"
The prosecutor stood slowly. "Your Honor, while the footage does raise questions about the circumstances of the arrest, the people maintain that Mr. Hayes caused significant property damage." "In self-defense," Marcus interrupted, "Mr. Voss attempted to run him over with a vehicle. My client had every right to defend himself." Judge Brennan raised a hand. "Ms. Garrett, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Do you believe this case should proceed to trial?" There was a long silence. Finally, Ms. Garrett spoke. "No, Your Honor." The judge nodded. "Then the charges are dismissed. Mr. Hayes, you are free to go." The gavel came down, and just like that, it was over. I walked out of the courthouse with my sister's arm around my shoulders. The snow had stopped, and the sun was breaking through the clouds for the first time in days. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I didn't do anything," I said. "It was Linda and Marcus and the judge." "You survived," she said. "That's something." We walked to her car in silence. But as I buckled my seatbelt, I thought about Judge Brennan's question. Why is this Marine still behind bars? The system had failed me, but it had also eventually caught itself. Not because it was designed to, but because a few people cared enough to ask the right questions.
3 months after the charges were dismissed, I received a letter in the mail. It was from the Department of Veterans Affairs, printed on official letterhead with the eagle and flag emblem stamped at the top. I almost threw it away. I'd received so many VA letters over the years, most of them denials or requests for more documentation, that I'd learned not to get my hopes up. But something about this one felt different. I opened it, standing in the narrow hallway of the Veterans Shelter in Lakewood, surrounded by the smell of industrial cleaner and the distant sound of a basketball game playing on someone's TV. Dear Mr. Hayes, This letter serves as formal notification that your service records have been fully reviewed and corrected. The erroneous discharge classification that appeared in your file has been removed, and your honorable discharge status has been verified and updated across all military and federal databases. Additionally, following a comprehensive review of your service history, including classified operations conducted in 2011, the Department of Defense has authorized the release of a commendation previously sealed due to operational security concerns. You are hereby awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Valor for actions performed during Operation Phantom Reach on March 17, 2011, in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. Your courage under fire and selfless service directly resulted in the safe extraction of 3 wounded coalition personnel and the prevention of further casualties. A formal ceremony will be held at Buckley Space Force Base on April 12th at 1400 hours. You are invited to attend along with family and guests of your choosing. Respectfully, Lieutenant General Marcus T. Reeves, Deputy Director, Defense Personnel and Security. I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat down on the floor and cried. Not because of the medal, though that mattered. Not because my records were finally corrected, though that mattered too. I cried because someone had finally seen me. Not as a case file, not as a problem to be managed or a statistic to be processed. As a Marine.
The ceremony was held on a bright, clear Saturday in April. The Colorado sky stretched wide and blue overhead, the kind of sky that made you believe in second chances. My sister came, of course. She brought her 2 kids, my niece Emily, age 8, and my nephew Jacob, age 6. They were dressed in their Sunday best, squirming with excitement and asking 100 questions about what a Bronze Star was and whether I'd met the president. Linda Morales came. So did Marcus Chen, looking more put together than I'd ever seen him, with a new suit and a proud smile. Even Judge Brennan showed up, standing quietly in the back with his wife, a small, elegant woman with kind eyes, who kept whispering to him throughout the ceremony. The base commander, Colonel Patricia Henley, conducted the presentation. She was a sharp woman in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor and a chest full of ribbons that told a story of 3 decades of service. I stood at attention in my dress blues, the same uniform I'd worn to that first court hearing, but this time it felt differently. This time it felt earned. Colonel Henley read the citation aloud, her voice carrying across the assembled crowd. For exceptionally valorous actions on March 17, 2011, while serving as a rifleman with 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines during combat operations in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. When his unit came under intense enemy fire from fortified positions, Corporal Hayes exposed himself to hostile fire to provide covering fire for wounded coalition personnel. Despite being injured by shrapnel, he continued to engage the enemy and coordinated the evacuation of 3 critically wounded soldiers. His actions exemplify the highest standards of courage and selflessness. She pinned the medal to my chest. The crowd applauded. I saluted, and for the first time in over a decade, I felt like I was standing on solid ground.
After the ceremony, there was a small reception in one of the base buildings. Folding tables covered with paper tablecloths, trays of sandwiches, and a sheet cake decorated with the Marine Corps emblem. My niece and nephew attacked the cake with the enthusiasm of people who'd been promised sugar and weren't about to let protocol get in the way. Judge Brennan approached me, extending his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Hayes," he said. "Thank you, Your Honor," I replied, shaking it. He glanced down at the medal on my chest. "I owe you an apology." "You don't—" "I do." His voice was firm, but not unkind. "I looked at you that day in court and made assumptions. I saw the charges, saw the file, and I didn't ask the right questions. I should have." "You asked them eventually," I said. "That's more than most people did." He nodded slowly. "I've been on the bench for over 20 years. I've seen thousands of cases, and I've learned that the system gets it wrong more often than we'd like to admit. But that doesn't excuse it, and it doesn't excuse me." "Your Honor," I said, "you changed your mind when you saw the evidence. That takes courage. A lot of people wouldn't have." He smiled faintly. "Well, I'm glad I did." His wife joined us then, introducing herself as Margaret. She was warm and gracious, congratulating me and asking about my plans for the future. "I'm not sure yet," I admitted. "I'm working with Linda to find permanent housing, and I've got a couple of job interviews lined up. Nothing fancy, but it's a start. You'll land on your feet, I can tell."
Linda found me later, standing near the windows overlooking the parade ground. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'm good," I said, and I meant it. She handed me a folder. "One more thing." I opened it. Inside was a letter from a construction company based in Denver, Hayes Contracting, LLC. "What's this?" "A job offer," Linda said. "The owner is a Marine vet. He saw your story in the news after the charges were dropped. He's been looking for someone to help manage projects. It's full-time, with benefits." I stared at the letter, unable to speak. "You don't have to decide now," Linda said, "but he wants to meet with you next week." "I'll be there," I said. She smiled. "I know you will."
That night, after everyone had gone home, I sat on the steps outside the shelter and looked up at the stars. The city lights drowned out most of them, but a few stubborn points of light still managed to punch through the haze. I thought about the courtroom, about Judge Brennan's eye roll, about the way the system had chewed me up and spat me out, over and over again. But I also thought about Linda, who'd fought for me when she didn't have to, about Marcus, who'd believed in me even when he wasn't sure he should, about Judge Brennan, who'd stopped, looked closer, and asked the question that changed everything. Why is this Marine still behind bars? It was a simple question, but it was the right one, and it had made all the difference.
6 months later, I stood in the office of Hayes Contracting, LLC, my office now, looking out over the Denver skyline. The job had turned into something more than I'd expected. I wasn't just managing projects, I was helping to build something. The company specialized in adaptive housing for disabled veterans, and every project felt personal. My apartment was small but clean, my own space, my own bed, my own front door that I could lock at night. I'd started attending a veterans support group once a week. It wasn't easy, talking about the things I'd tried to bury for so long, but it helped. And I'd reconnected with some of the Marines I'd served with. Not all of them, some were gone, some had moved on, but a few had reached out after hearing about the ceremony, and we'd started meeting for coffee once a month. Life wasn't perfect, but it was mine. One afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. "Is this Marcus Hayes?" a voice asked. "Yes. Who's this?" "My name's David Chen. You don't know me, but I'm a Marine. I saw your story on the news, the court case, the medal ceremony, everything. And I wanted to reach out because—" He paused. "I'm in a similar situation. I've been fighting the VA for 2 years to get my discharge status corrected. I don't know what to do." I sat down, grabbed a pen, and started taking notes. "Tell me everything," I said.
That was the first call. There were more. Veterans who'd been failed by the system, who'd been forgotten, dismissed, labeled as problems instead of people. I couldn't help all of them, but I could help some. I started working with Linda to connect veterans with resources. I testified before the city council about the need for better support services. I even went back to court a few times, not as a defendant, but as a witness, vouching for Marines who needed someone to stand up for them.
And every time I walked into a courtroom, I thought about Judge Brennan, about the moment when he stopped, looked at that document, and asked the question, why is this Marine still behind bars? It was a question that shouldn't have needed to be asked, but it was asked, and because it was, I was here, not just surviving, living.
2 years after my charges were dismissed, I received an invitation to speak at a veterans advocacy event in Washington, D.C. The organizers wanted me to share my story, to talk about what had happened and what still needed to change. I almost said no, but then I thought about David Chen and the dozens of other veterans who'd called me since. I thought about the ones who hadn't called, who didn't know there was help available, who were still sitting in courtrooms, wearing old uniforms, waiting for someone to see them. So I said yes. The event was held in a hotel ballroom filled with advocates, lawmakers, and veterans from across the country. I wore my dress blues and the Bronze Star. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the podium and looked out at the crowd. And I told them the truth. I told them about the courtroom, about the eye roll, about the years of fighting a system that didn't care. But I also told them about Linda, about Marcus, about Judge Brennan, about the people who'd asked the right questions. We talk a lot about supporting our veterans, I said. We say thank you for your service, and we put flags on our lawns, and we stand for the national anthem, and those things matter, but they're not enough. I paused, looking down at the podium, then back up at the faces in front of me. Because when a veteran is sitting in a jail cell, accused of crimes they didn't commit, a flag on a lawn doesn't help. When a veteran is living on the street because the VA lost their paperwork, a handshake doesn't help. When a veteran is fighting to prove they served their country because someone made a clerical error, saying thank you doesn't help. My voice grew stronger. What helps is action. What helps is people who care enough to ask the hard questions. What helps is a system that doesn't wait for a veteran to be broken before it decides to pay attention. I looked directly at the lawmakers in the front row.
So if you want to support veterans, don't just thank us. Fix the system. Make sure that no Marine, no soldier, no sailor, no airman has to fight as hard to get help at home as they fought to defend this country abroad. The room was silent. Then someone started clapping. Then another. Then the entire room was on its feet. After the speech, a young woman approached me. She was in her mid-20s, wearing a Navy dress uniform. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I'm fighting the VA right now. I've been trying to get my disability claim approved for 3 years. Your story, it gave me hope." I handed her my card. "Call me. I'll help however I can." She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Thank you." As she walked away, I felt it again. That sense of purpose I'd lost somewhere between leaving the Marines and ending up in that courtroom. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting for something that mattered, and I wasn't fighting alone.
If this story hit you, I need you to do something right now. Stand up. Literally, get up from wherever you're sitting. Feel the ground under your feet. You have the freedom to move, to act, to make a difference. Right now, there's a veteran sitting in a courtroom hoping someone will ask the right question. There's a Marine sleeping on the street because the system failed them. Here's what you do. Share this video. Don't let this story die here. Reach out to a veteran you know, today, not tomorrow. Support a local veterans organization with action, not just words. And if you're a veteran fighting your own battle right now, listen to me. You are not alone. You are not forgotten. You deserve better. Now, sit back down. Subscribe if this meant something to you. Comment what needs to change. Don't let this story end here. Make it matter.